I had learned to spot the countdown long before I understood what it really meant. The faint glowing digits hovered just above a person's hairline, visible only to me, ticking down toward the exact moment they would decide to walk away from the person they claimed to love. I was 12 when I watched my father's counter bleed down to 0. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening right in our kitchen. He set a stack of divorce papers down on the scuffed quartz island, grabbed his leather jacket off the back of a chair, and walked out the front door without glancing back at my mother or me. No big fight, no screaming, no long conversation. Just 0, and then he was gone. 2 years ago, I watched the same clock run out for Rachel, my best friend since college. For months I had stared at the slow dropping numbers hanging over her ex-boyfriend, helpless to say a word about what I saw. I could not explain the vision without sounding completely unhinged. All I could do was nudge her gently, urge her to think about her own happiness. When his counter finally hit 0, Rachel stuffed suitcases full of her clothes in the middle of the night and drove away from the apartment they shared. She was terrified but free. Those 2 moments carved a deep, quiet fear into my bones. More than anything else in my adult life, I dreaded seeing glowing numbers materialize above Dan's head. Dan was my husband, the man I had married 7 years earlier in a small outdoor ceremony outside Cincinnati. For every single one of those 7 years, there had been nothing. No faint glow, no shifting digits, no ticking countdown hanging over him at all. Some nights I would sit across from him studying the space just above his dark brown hair, half expecting numbers to bloom into view, and there was always empty air. I told myself I had beaten the pattern that had broken my child. I really believed I was one of the lucky ones. Dan was kind, quick to laugh, reliable. He held me when I woke up from old nightmares about my father leaving. He brought home coffee on cold weekday mornings. He traveled often for his sales job, but he always texted goodnight from his hotel. On paper and through my strange secret date, our marriage felt. It was a late August week. The sun had dipped below the rooftops of our suburban neighborhood, painting soft orange light across the kitchen cabinets. I had just finished clearing dinner plates off the table. Dan had gotten home an hour late, delayed by last-minute client calls. He leaned against the kitchen island, sipping a bottle of beer, scrolling through work emails on his phone. I was wiping down the counter with a damp, my gaze drifting upward out of old nerve. At first I thought my eyes were playing. A faint, pale silver shimmer flickered in the air. My hand froze to wipe, the damp rag dripping water onto the floor. I blinked hard, certain exhaustion was messing with my. I had worked a long day at my marketing job, back-to-back meetings and tight campaign lines. Maybe I was just imagining things, letting my old abandonment fears manufacture ghosts where. The shimmer did vanish. Clear, sharp numbers ended there, floating just his hair. 147, my throat tightened. My heart knocked hard against my ribs. For 7 years, there had been absolutely nothing, and now the countdown was here. It was real. The vision I had feared for so long had finally arrived in my own home, hanging over the man I trusted more than anyone. Dan did not notice. He kept on his phone, his thumb sliding the screen, completely oblivious to the glowing clock. He let out a quiet huff, muttering something about a difficult client, and took another slow. He looked exactly the same as the other night. Warm, familiar, the husband I thought I knew, but those glowing digits hovered above him, counting down toward the day. I set the down on the counter, my fingers lightly. I forced my facial muscles to stay neutral, careful not to let panic cross my face. I could thaw. There was no way to bring this up without sounding well. If I tried to explain that I saw a supernatural countdown predicting his to abandon me, he would think stress had broken my mind. He might start looking at me differently, treat me like someone stable. "Everything okay?" Dan asked from his phone. His tone was soft, concerned, the same gentle voice. "You it all of a sudden." I swallowed hard, pushing a smile onto my lips. My eyes kept darting up with silver numbers. 147 burned in my peripheral vision. Every past felt heavy. I had no idea shifted inside him. There had been no huge fight, no explosive argument, no obvious crisis between us. Outwardly, our life looked perfectly fine. Yet somewhere deep inside Dan, the decision had begun. The timer did not lie. It only appeared when a person started internally preparing a partner. "Just a long work day," I answered, voice steadier than I felt. "My brain is still on campaign deadlines." He nodded, accepting my lie without suspicion, back to his emails. I turned away from him, staring out the kitchen window backyard. The crickets had started chirping out in the grass. Somewhere out on the car door slammed shut. Inside our quiet kitchen, invisible to everyone but me, the phone kept ticking. 147 units remained. I did not know what each unit measured, whether they were days or something else. I only knew where this clock ultimately led. It led to 0. It led to walking out. It led to being left behind, all over again. My fingers moved fast over the pile of paper, ears straining for any sound from upstairs. Steam from the shower had faded minutes ago, and I knew Dan could walk down the hallway at any second. Most of the receipts lined up with trips he had told me about. Downtown client dinners, overnight hotel stays in Columbus, gas charges for long-distance drives. But one thin receipt slipped out from beneath a thick stack, and my breath caught. It was a dinner receipt from a restaurant in Lexington. The date fell on a weekday when Dan had told me he was staying late at the office, not traveling out of town at all. No client name was written anywhere on the slip. Just 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, and dessert for 2. 2 people. Not a business group, not a team dinner, just 2. I folded the small paper and slipped it deep inside the back pocket of my jeans, my pulse racing. I shut the drawer quietly and stepped away from the desk, just as footsteps creaked on the stairs. Dan rounded the corner, fresh out of the shower, hair damp, wearing soft sweatpants and an old t-shirt. He glanced at me, but he did not suspect a thing. Relief tangled with cold dread in my chest. I had tangible proof he was hiding something, yet I still had no idea exactly what it was. That night, the silver number above him sat at 121. Over the next 48 hours, I built quiet lines of defense for myself. I pulled copies of our joint mortgage paperwork, saved screenshots of shared bank statements to a password-locked folder on my laptop. I did not want to overreact, but I refused to be caught completely blind the way my mother had been when my father left. Back then, she had not even known how much money sat in their account. I would not repeat that mistake. I called Rachel, this time bringing up the Lexington ring. I left out the supernatural countdown, only laying out the hard physical evidence. I told her about the dinner for 2 on a night Dan claimed to work. Rachel went quiet for a long moment on the... That doesn't add up, she'd. But one receipt is not ironclad proof of an... It could be a private meeting he didn't want to explain. Maybe something messy. Her caution was real, yet it left me feeling alone. I carried knowledge she could never fully grasp. I saw the countdown, the unavoidable march toward his choice. 2 evenings later, I tried to confront Dan about the distance growing. I chose a calm moment after dinner. No races, no accusations. I told him I felt like walls were going up in us, that I missed the easy openness we used. I asked him if there was something weighing on him he was afraid to say. Dan's expression hardened. He leaned back in his dining room chair, arms folding across. Here we go again, he said, his harp. Lila, every time I have a busy stretch at work, you start digging for problems there. Is this me? Or is this about your dad walking out when we were a kid? The stung. He kept circling back to my trauma, using it to dismiss every one of my concerns. It was a tactic, and it worked. If I pushed harder, I became the unstable wife haunted by old wounds. If I silent, I watched the timer keep ticking. The silver digits above his head. Now 100. I am not making this up because of what happened 12, I said, my voice shaking despite my best effort to stay steady. Something I did for you. Maybe you need a therapist, Dan replied flatly. I'm tired of being treated like I'm about to abandon reason. I bit back the urge to pull out the Lexington. Blurting it out would trigger a fight I was ready to wage. I had only one receipt. No context, no answers. I could see the countdown, but I could not show it to anyone. If I unleashed everything now, I risked burning every bridge before I truth. Our conversation ended cold. We cleaned the dinner dish in total silence. The comfortable warmth that had defined our married years was gone, replaced by a heavy, unspoken tension hanging loose. Later that night, sitting alone in the bathroom and had fallen asleep, I stared at the crumpled restaurant wrist across my palm. I weighed my options. I could keep gathering evidence slowly, or I could blow everything apart right now. I made my choice. I would keep investigating. I would dig until I understood exact fighting against. This was fear. This was self-protection. I was no longer just waiting passively for the toward zero. I had crossed a line. I was actively defending my own life, even if it meant sneaking and digging in shadows. The risk was huge. If Dan discovered what I was doing, everything would shatter instantly, but doing nothing. When I returned to the bedroom, I glanced up at Dan's sleeping head. 110. Every unit that slipped away brought me closer to the moment he would make his final choice. I climbed under the covers, lying awake beside him, fully aware that the ground beneath our marriage was already crumbling. Sleep slipped away from me that night. Lying beside Dan in our king-size bed, I kept my eyes fixed on the faint silver glow hanging just above his sleeping forehead. The number had shifted. It read 144. 3 units had ticked away while he slept. I still could not tell if each mark stood for a full day or hours, or some strange internal metric only the countdown understood. Whatever it measured, time was dwindling. He breathed slow and deep, completely unaware of the clock marking his quiet drift away from our marriage. Moonlight filtered through the bedroom curtains, painting pale streaks across his shoulder. To any outside observer, we looked like a normal married couple resting through the night. Only I carried the weight of what I could see. Part of me wanted to shake him awake and demand an honest explanation. Another larger part held me back. What question could I even ask? How do you bring up an invisible supernatural timer without destroying everything? If I said the words out loud, I risked being labeled paranoid, traumatized by my father's old abandonment. Dan would begin to treat me like someone fragile, someone whose fears could not be trusted. When morning rolled around, I forced myself to fall back into our regular routine. I made coffee, packed his lunch, smiled through small talk over toast. All the while my gaze kept drifting upward, tracking that floating number, 140. I resolved to tread gently. I would not make wild accusations. Instead, I would probe, watch for small cracks, try to understand what had shifted inside him. Maybe it was work burnout. Maybe he felt stuck in suburban routine. If I could find the root of whatever was turning it, I might still repair it before the timer hit 0. That fragile hope kept. Dan left for the office. He kissed my cheek on his way out, grabbed his briefcase, and headed for the. I stood by the front window and watched his sedan back out of the. The silver digits stayed visible above his head until his car rounded the street corner and vanished from sight. Once he was gone, the glow dissolved completely. I worked from home that day, but my focus. Marketing spreadsheets sat open on my laptop while my mind replayed every interaction from the past several months. Had there been quiet signs I had brushed aside? Late nights at the office, sudden last-minute business trips, moments where he's distant, his mind somewhere far away while we ate dinner. I had written those moments off as sales job stress. Now every small memory twisted into something. Late that afternoon, I could not tell her about the kitchen. That secret stayed locked. But I needed to voice my growing unease. She picked up between physical therapy patient appointments, background noise of a clinic hallway humming. Something feels with Dan, I said, keeping my tone low and steady. I can't point to one big fight or mistake. It's all these tiny little shifts. He's physically present but emotionally else. Rachel paused on the line. Are you sure this isn't your old childhood stuff back in? Asked softly. Your dad leaving mess really bad. Sometimes our brains manufacture threats just to prepare us for pain. Words stung, because I had already asked myself that exact question. I wanted so badly for this to be my own anxiety lying to me, but the glowing numbers were not a product of my imagination. I had watched them down overnight. I wish that was all it was, I replied. We hung a short time later, and I was left alone with. That evening came home again. When he stepped through our front door, the silver shimmered above him. 135. 7 more units had disappeared day. I tried my careful for dinner. Kept my voice calm. No anger, no accusation. I told him I had noticed he seemed worn out lately, that I worried he was carrying work. I asked if there was wanted to talk through, anything weighing on him with me. Dan pushed his around on his plate, his guarded. It's just client chaos, he said quickly. Big quarterly push. Nothing for you to stress over. I pressed a little further. What about us? Do you feel happy with how things are going between us? That question made down his fork entirely. He studied my face, and I could see suspicion flicker across his features. Where's this coming from? He asked. Haven't something to make you unhappy? Are you still stuck thinking about your dad walking out? Accusation hung heavy in the air. He was framing concern as leftover trauma, not legitimate observation. He deflected every chance for real honesty, and the countdown kept drifting downward above his hair. 133. I backed off, not pushed too hard too fast. But after dinner, while he showered upstairs, I found myself standing in front of his home office desk. The drawer where he stored receipts and travel sat slightly ajar. Curiosity and fear tangled together inside my chest. If I wanted answers, I could not only rely on gentle conversation to keep deflecting. My hand hovered over the drawer handle. I understood the risk. If Dan caught me snooping through his private documents, he would be furious. Trust would shatter between us, but the timer kept ticking, and I had almost no about what was driving it. I pulled the drawer open. Stacks of hotel receipts, gas station slips, and reports sat inside. I sorting through them one by one, heart hammering in my ribs, knowing at any moment I might steps coming down the hallway. The weight of what I had seen downtown settled heavy over every hour of my days. I went through work meetings, prepared meals, and exchanged small talk with Dan, all while carrying the sharp, burning memory of him laughing beside another woman. The silver countdown hung over him, dropping steadily. 51, 47, 42. Knowing his secret did not make the timer slow. If anything, it felt like it was accelerating. Old childhood trauma roared back to life. Nightmares returned. I dreamed of my 12-year-old self standing in that old kitchen, staring at divorce papers on the quartz island while my father walked out the door. I would jolt awake in the dark, heart pounding, Dan sleeping peacefully right beside me. He had no clue I held the full truth of his double life. He still believed I was only haunted by my own anxious imagination. Rachel reached out, asking to meet. I agreed, though I kept my guard up. We met at a quiet coffee shop away from both our homes. Sun filtered through large shop windows. Steam curled above our mug. She apologized sincerely for calling Dan behind my back, saying she had only feared I was spiraling into paranoia. When I told her I had watched Dan with another woman, her face paled. There was no more doubt in her eye. "I'm so sorry I misjudged this," she said, voice low. "I should have believed you from the start." Even with her validation, the damage remained. For weeks she had treated my fears as trauma-fueled fantasy. That memory would not simply vanish. I was grateful for her support, yet I could not fully lean on her the way I once. Outside the coffee shop, my work phone buzzed. A high-priority marketing project had blown up. Client revisions poured in. Deadlines got pushed forward. Work stress piled directly on top of my marital crisis. I felt stretched paper thin, pulled in every direction. Some evenings I could barely focus. I kept replaying the sight of Dan's arm near them, the way they laughed together like they already shared a whole. Dan noticed my exhaustion, and he twisted it to fit his. Over dinner one night, he leaned across the table, tone soft and patronizing. "You're burning yourself out, Ed. Work stress plus all your old phones. It's too much for you right now. Maybe you should scale back hours." It made my boil. He was the one living a life, yet he acted as if my suffering was a product of my overwork. Above his head, the silver number ticked down 38. He thought he had everything neatly. He believed he could keep living at our house while maintaining his other relationship town, and I would keep chalking my unease up to stress and One rainy Saturday afternoon, I stayed home while Dan headed out, claiming a weekend-long regional sales workshop. I knew better. That workshop was a lie. I was going to her. Once his car vanished down the street, the countdown glowed with him. I wandered through a quiet house, looking at all the pieces of our 7-year. Our wedding photo hung on the hallway wall, the couch we picked out together, the kitchen island where we had shared so many morning coffees, all of it I. For years I had Anne. I had clung to the belief that I had the good man, the one who would save me from my fate. That comforting illusion shattered completely in that moment. He was not a villain, not some cruel monster. He was ordinary, weak, selfish. He wanted the comfort of our stable marriage and the thrill of side. He avoided honest conversations instead of making hard choices. He let me live in blindness rather than face. I sank down to the kitchen floor, back pressing. Grief crashed over me. Grief for the I thought I had. Grief for the safe future I had spent years counting on. I cried there alone, no one to witness it. When the tears slowed, something hardened inside me. I could not keep drowning in heartbreak, waiting for the countdown to hit 0 and letting him walk out on me like my father had only path. I did not have to tell another story. I pulled out my phone. I looked up family law attorneys in the area, reading client reviews, jotting down consultation contact information. I would not rush into a screaming fight. I would not act out of raw rage. I would prepare. I would gather every receipt, every mental note, every fragment of proof. I would know my rights over our house, our joint savings, our retirement accounts. If the end was coming, I would meet it on my own, not his. When Dan returned home late Sunday evening, he walked in carrying an ended conference tote bag, pretending he had spent work seminars. He stretched, complained about long, boring presentations, and had gone. The silver glow reappeared through the front door. 32. I gave a distant smile. I said. Inside, I was no longer the terror life waiting to be abandoned. The fantasy of our perfect marriage was dead, but I had found my resolve. The countdown was still ticking, anger just its prisoner. The isolation weighed heavier with every passing day. I could no longer lean fully on Rachel, and I dared not speak a word of my real fear to anyone else. At home, Dan stayed polite and pleasant on the surface, Yet there was a quiet distance between us that no casual dinner or light-hearted joke could bridge. The silver countdown above his head kept bleeding down. 73, 68, 64. My brief truce had bought nothing, only let the clock march onward. I knew I could not afford to hold back any longer. I had to resume digging. I chose to move more carefully this time. I avoided rummaging through his home office drawers where he might notice disturbed paper. Instead, I focused on digital trails. Late each night, once Dan was sound asleep, I would sit at my laptop and comb through linked account notifications, credit card transaction alerts that synced to our shared email inbox. Most charges were ordinary: gas, groceries, office supply orders. But one evening, a new monthly recurring charge popped up on our joint credit card statement. It was billed under a generic name, no obvious business logo, and it charged $57 every month to a downtown apartment complex. My stomach twisted. $57 was far too small for rent itself, but it could cover a parking spot, a storage unit, or some kind of utility add-on for a private residence. The billing address was across the city, nowhere near any client site Dan was supposed to visit for work. I jotted down the complex name on a scrap of notebook paper, heart hammering. This was another thread I had not uncovered before. The next afternoon, Dan told me he was heading out for a long client meeting across town. He kissed my forehead before walking out the door. I watched his sedan pull away from the driveway, and the silver glow above his head vanished as he turned the corner. The number sat at 60. I took my car and drove toward the apartment complex listed on the credit card. It was a modern mid-rise building in a trendy downtown neighborhood, brick facades and shaded visitor parking. I parked along the curb, staying far enough back that Dan would not spot my vehicle if he happened to walk. I sat there for hours, peering toward the main entrance, watching residents come in. I half expected to see him step through those doors, but he never. I began to second-guess myself. Maybe the charge was for some obscure work-related service I simply did not understand. Maybe I was chasing ghosts again. Just as I was ready to give up and dream, I saw him exit from a side door. He was not in his bed. He wore casual jeans and a soft knit sweater, and he was not. A woman walked beside him, her arm looped lightly. They laughed together as they crossed the parking lot. I ducked down in the driver's seat, pressing my shoulder against the window so they would not catch sight of. Every muscle in my body rigid. This was not a meeting. This was business. The way he lured her, the easy smile face, told me everything I needed to know. He had built a separate hidden life right in this city, while returning home each night to play the devoted. They climbed into his sedan. I remained parked on the curb for a long time after gone, my hands shaking against. Pieces clicked together one after another. The Lexington for two, the unexplained evenings, the recurring mysterious monthly charge. None of these were randomnesses. He had been building this for months, long before the countdown numbers first became visible. The timer had not processed. It had only shown me what was already well underway. That realization hit like cold water. I had misread the core nature of the self. I drove home slowly. When Dan arrived back at our house several hours later, he walked in wearing that same casual sweater, acting as if he had spent the whole day locked in grueling corpses. He complained about difficult clients, sighed about heavily targets, and asked what I had got. Above his head, the silver digit read 54, I guess neutral. I said nothing about what I'd seen downtown. I did not pull out receipts or scream accusations. New terrible truths were settling inside me. He was not just thinking about leaving me. He had already constructed an alt without me. The future existed, tangible and real, in that day. That Rachel. I did not lay out every brutal detail, but I told her I had with another woman. Her reply came back quickly, filled with shock and remorse. She admitted she regretted calling Dan behind my back and she wanted to meet. Even so, I could not bring myself to fully open back up to her. The damage from your choice lingered. Trusted her care for me, yet I could no longer trust her to Dan. I sat on our backyard patio long asleep, cricket in the dark grass, and I thought about my mother, staring at divorce papers on the decades ago. For years I had told I would never be her. I thought I had married the good man who would break that family curse, but I had been fooling myself. Dan was not evil. He had simply wanted two separate lives, and he had convinced himself he could keep anyone getting hurt. The countdown above down toward 51. I understood now. 0 was not the beginning of his choice. 0 was only the final moment he stopped pretending. I booked a 1-hour consultation with a local family law attorney for the following Friday. I did not tell a soul, not even Rachel. This step felt too fragile, too easy for Dan to somehow catch wind of it. I printed copies of every document I had collected: the Lexington dinner receipt, screenshots of the mysterious monthly apartment complex charge, bank statement exports, mortgage papers. I stored physical copies in a locked file folder I kept hidden in the trunk of my car, far away from our house. Digital backup sat encrypted inside 2 separate cloud drives. Every evening, the silver numbers above Dan's head kept falling. 32, 28, 24. I learned to move through our home in 2 separate layers. On the surface, I was his calm, worn-out wife. Underneath, I built my safety net piece by piece. I reviewed our finances carefully, mapping joint assets versus individual ones. I double-checked my work contract, confirmed my salary, and benefits would hold steady regardless of marital fallout. I made sure my emergency fund was fully separated into my personal bank account. Dan sensed a subtle shift in me. I was no longer tense and anxious, no longer pressing him for uncomfortable conversation. I was quiet, composed, almost detached. He mistook my preparation for surrender. He relaxed, growing more comfortable in his double life. Some nights he would come home late, offering thin work excuses, and I would simply nod and accept them without arguing. He thought I had finally worn myself out and stopped. He had no idea I was gathering every tool I would need when everything broke up. The day of my lawyer consultation arrived. I told Dan I had an off-site marketing workshop downtown. I drove to the law office, hands tight on the steering. The small office was lined with legal books, soft, neutral paint on the wall. I sat across from the attorney and laid out the whole practical picture, leaving out the supernatural countdown and there was no point mentioning something no one could verify. I spoke only about risks, hidden recurring charges, and what I had witnessed outside the apartment. The lawyer walked me through hard reasons. Ohio was an equitable distribution state. The house we had bought together, joint savings, retirement funds would all be divided early, but nothing would automatically land entirely in favor. My evidence of infidelity could factor into proper division, yet it was not some magic weapon that would ruin him. She warned me that if Dan painted me as emotionally unstable, that narrative could hurt me. I had to stay level-headed, avoid dramatic outbursts when confrontation finally. I left the office with page notes, a clear checklist of what else I needed. I felt grounded, less helpless than I had in months. Fear still lingered, but blind panic. Weekend. Rachel and again. I shared that I had spoken to a lawyer. I did not go into every detail, but I let her know I was preparing for separation. She looked concerned. Whatever you need, I'm here. Told me. I can give you a place to stay if you have to. That safe mattered. Still, I kept my guard up. The memory of her calling Dan behind my back did. Back at home, cracks began to show in Dan's character. He grew distracted, sometimes forgetting small details. One night, he left a woman's silver earring tucked in the inner pocket of a travel jacket. I found it when I hung his coat up. My fingers closed around the cold brie. Not confront him. I slipped it into my evidence folder instead. The countdown above him. Dan started picking up on quiet signs off. He noticed files missing from the pocket area. He caught me checking bank account screens when he was not looking. He did not know exactly what I was doing, but over him. His evidence wavered. Sometimes he studied me, trying to read what was going on by face. The casual, assured manner he had maintained for so fray. One night after dinner, he sat down beside me on the couch. The television played some mindless reality show in the background, volume turned low, the silver glow above his head. 16. Different lately, Dan said, voice cautious. Quiet, distant. Are you all right? I turned to look at him. For a heartbeat, I considered laying everything bare. The receipts, the earring, the apartment I had seen, but the lawyer echoed in my mind. Not yet. I was still missing pieces. I smiled a tired smile. Just process a lot, I answered. Work, all of it. He searched my eyes, clearly satisfied with that answer, but he had no case to make. He could not prove I was building my case against him. He could only feel that the ground was no longer solid beneath his feet. For the time in this whole ordeal, growing uneasy. The power balance was shifting. I was no longer merely waiting for the clock to hit 0. I was getting ready for when it did. We moved through another week held together by thin pretense. Every ordinary moment felt like a performance. Dan still left for work each morning, still came home at night, still went through the motions of our marriage. But the easy self-assurance he had carried for so long was gone. He double-checked his bags before leaving the house. He deleted browser history after using the shared home computer. The silver countdown above his head kept slipping downward. 16, 13, 11. It was drawing dangerously close to 0. I kept expanding my evidence set. On one of Dan's supposed overnight work trips, I remotely pulled data from our shared home security camera. The footage confirmed he never checked back into our house that night. He sent me goodnight text messages as usual, but the camera showed our front door stayed locked and undisturbed from dusk until sunrise. I clipped and saved that video file, adding it to my encrypted archive. Late one Tuesday night, Dan sat on the edge of our bed, scrolling through his phone. Unaware I could see the clock hanging over 11. I watched his thumbs fly across the screen, typing quick private messages. I had no doubt who he was talking to. A quiet thought settled in my mind. Whatever final plan he had been building was nearly finished. 2 days later, Rachel called me in a panic. A mutual acquaintance had run into Dan at the downtown apartment complex. He was moving boxes into the building. Furniture boxes, household supplies. He was not just visiting the one. He was setting up a permanent new home. My blood ran cold. That was his hidden final. He was not only having an affair, he was preparing to physically relocate. Once everything was assembled, he intended to walk out of our marriage, just like my father had done all those years. He would leave divorce papers behind and vanish into his new life. The countdown above his head ticked down. Only 7 units remained. Time was on. I told Rachel I needed to be. She reaffirmed her spare bedroom was open. I reviewed all my evidence. Restaurant receipt, credit card billing records, the silver earring, security camera. The lawyer's notes sat open on mop. I was as prepared as I could be. There would be no more waiting passively for him to. That evening, Dan arrived home late. He dragged himself through the front door, tired from hauling. He tried to hide his chin, offering a mumbled excuse about a long day of clients' visits. The moment he stepped inside, the faint silver glow materialized him. Dinner. Ate with him in every small gesture brittle. I could feel the end brown on us. He was days away from his setup, days away from. Later, while he shut upstairs, his cell phone lit up on the counter. A text preview popped up on the lock screen. It was her. The message was short, everything almost ready. I can't wait to fully hear. I stared at those words. This was the confirmation. He was counting down to his escape just as surely as the supernatural clock above his head counted down for me. I snapped a quick photo of the screen with my phone before the notification faded away. Another piece locked in the folder. When Dan back downstairs, he grabbed his phone and tucked it. He did not know who I had taken. Nerves were frayed. He kept glancing at the front door, like he was mentally already somewhere else. The silver number dropped to 5. Stood now. He planned to execute his exit very soon. He would lay on our kitchen island, exactly the way my father had done decades ago, and walk through life. He expected me to be stunned, grief-stricken, lost. He would leave me reeling, as my mother had been, but I was not the same girl who had walked away. I was not going to sit and receive the blow in silence. The countdown was nearing its end, yet I would not let him take the moment of rupture. The confrontation was unavoidable. It would happen in this house, and it would happen before his clock hit 0. We moved through another week held together by thin pretense. Every ordinary moment felt like a performance. Dan still left for work each morning, still came home at night, still went through the motions of our marriage. But the easy self-assurance he had carried for so long was gone. He double-checked his bags before leaving the house. He deleted browser history after using the shared home computer. The silver countdown above his head kept slipping downward. 16, 13, 11. It was drawing dangerously close to 0. I kept expanding my evidence set. On one of Dan's supposed overnight work trips, I remotely pulled data from our shared home security camera. The footage confirmed he never checked back into our house that night. He sent me goodnight text messages as usual, but the camera showed our front door stayed locked and undisturbed from dusk until sunrise. I clipped and saved that video file, adding it to my encrypted archive. Late one Tuesday night, Dan sat on the edge of our bed, scrolling through his phone. Unaware I could see the clock hanging over 11. I watched his thumbs fly across the screen, typing quick, private messages. I had no doubt who he was talking to. A quiet thought settled in my mind. Whatever final plan he had been building was nearly finished. 2 days later, Rachel called me in a panic. A mutual acquaintance had run into Dan at the downtown apartment complex. He was moving boxes into the building. Furniture boxes, household supplies. He was not just visiting the one. He was setting up a permanent new. My blood ran cold. That was his hidden final plan. He was not only having an affair, he was preparing to physically relocate. Once everything was assembled, he intended to walk out of our marriage, just like my father had done all those years. He would leave divorce papers behind and vanish into his new life. The countdown above his head ticked down 7. Only 7 units. Time was almost gone. I told Rachel I needed me. She reaffirmed her spare bedroom was me. I reviewed all my evidence one last time. Receipt, Credit card billing records, the silver earring, security cam. The lawyer's notes sat open top. I was as prepared as I could possibly be. There would be no more waiting passively for him to. That evening, Dan arrived home later. He dragged himself through the front door, tired from halls. He tried to hide exhaustion, offering a mumbled excuse about a long day of client visits. The moment he stepped inside, the faint silver glow materialized. I made dinner, ate with him in minutes. Every small jet felt brittle. I could feel the end breathe down on us. He was days away from completing his setup, days away from. Later, while he showed upstairs, his cell phone lit up. A text preview popped up on the lock screen. It was her. The message was short. Everything. I can't wait until fully here. I said those words. This was the formation. He was counting down to his escape just as surely as the supernatural clock above his head for me. I snapped a quick photo of the screen with my phone before the notification faded away. Another piece locked in. When Dan came back downstairs, he grabbed his phone and tucked it. He did not notice it had taken. His were frayed. He kept dancing at the front door, like he was mentally ill. The silver number of 5. Good now. He planned to execute his exit very soon. He would lay paper on our kitchen island, exactly the way my father done decades ago, and with life. He expected me to be stunned, grief-stricken, lost. He expected to leave me reeling, mother had been. But I was not the same girl who had watched walk away. I was not going to sit and receive the blow in silence. The countdown was nearing its end, yet I would not let him date the moment of rupture. The caution was unavoidable. It would happen in this house, and it would happen before his clock hit 0. The next week blurred into a strange double life. Outwardly, Dan and I maintained the routine of a normal married couple. We ate breakfast together in the mornings, exchanged quick kisses before he headed for work, laughed at trivial television shows late at night. Every polite gesture, every casual smile felt like a carefully acted performance. All the while, that faint silver clock hung over him, ticking steadily downward. 110, 103, 97. I kept digging in small, calculated ways. I scanned through email archives when he stepped out to grab the mail. I flipped through his phone bill statements online, looking for repeated unfamiliar numbers. Most leads went nowhere. Unknown numbers traced back to client offices. Old emails held only standard sales work conversations. The Lexington receipt stayed tucked away in a locked desk drawer, my single solid piece of physical evidence. It was not enough to confront him with, not yet. I reached out to Rachel again, needing to talk through the weight pressing on my chest. I drove over to her apartment one Wednesday evening after work, bringing takeout tacos from our favorite local spot. Her living room smelled like lavender lotion and eucalyptus diffuser. We sat cross-legged on her couch, paper food containers spread across the coffee table. I laid out everything I had found, every small suspicious detail, leaning heavily on the dinner receipt. Rachel listened quietly, but I could read doubt in her expression long before she spoke. "I believe you saw something odd on that receipt," she said carefully, picking at the edge of her taco. "But Lila, you are operating from a place of so much older. What if you are assembling a worst-case story out of tiny fragments? Dan has always been good to you for 7 years. People get private dinners for all kinds of messy, harmless reasons." Her words landed heavy. This was my closest. The person who knew my whole history of abandonment. She was not betraying me. She was trying to ground me. Still, it left me hollowed. She could not see the. She had no way to understand that Dan's internal process of leaving was already well. To her eyes, I was a wounded woman chasing shadows. To me, I was watching a predictable disaster slowly. "Something is wrong," I insisted. "I wish I show you. I wish there was more." Ray lied. "I just don't want you to destroy your marriage over actions." We changed the subject to that, talking about her physical therapy clinic and a difficult patient in treating. But the crack between obvious. Unquestioning sub's gone. Now she viewed my worries through the filter of my I left her apartment later that night feeling more isolated than I. Back home, Dan noticed my quiet. He could sense I had been confiding in someone. He pressed me gently as I had been, and I told him I had just spent time. 2 days later, Dan brought up our conversation over Sunday brunch. Sunlight streamed through big plate glass windows. Other families chatted at by tables, and the silver number floating above Dan's head. "Rachel called the other day," Dan said, cutting into a pancake stack. "She's worried about how strictly. She thinks you should look into talking men." Blood ran cold. Rachel had reached out behind my back. She had not meant, I told myself. She was scared I was spiraling. The damage was done. Now Dan had external validation for his narrative, that my anxiety, not his secrets, was trouble. Now? I kept my voice flat, trying not to boil over. She cares about you, Dan replied. We both do. It might help you work through all that leftover pain from your dad, support you going. Every piece was falling into place for him. If I pushed harder about his lies, I would be the unstable partner who needed professional help. He would hold up Rachel's concern as proof. I had trusted my best friend with my fears, and that information had been turned against me, emotionally. I left. That evening, I tried to get in touch with Rachel through what had happened. I sent her 2 text messages. She read, she did not reply. Hours ticked by. The countdown above Dan kept falling, 88 by bedtime. I lay awake, replaying every choice I had made. Had I misread the whole situation? Could the timer be misleading me? Maybe the numbers meant something different than I thought. Maybe I was projecting my old wounds onto a husband. Terrible. I made a judgment that night. I decided to back off my investigation just a little. I would stop digging through his paperwork and emails. I would try to reset, try to be the easygoing wife he wanted me to be. If I softened, maybe the countdown would stop dropping. Maybe I could reverse whatever shift had happened inside him. It was a desperate gamble, built on incomplete information, and my burden not to lose everything. I pulled back. I stopped sneaking through his things. I laughed at his jokes, kept conversations light, avoided every difficult topic. Outwardly, our home felt calmer, but the silver digits of Dan's head did not slow down at all. They kept slipping, 5, 82, 79. My compromise, my attempt to play nice, changed absolutely nothing. The internal dissonance inside Dan was already in motion. I could not erase it. I sat on our back porch after sunset on the second night of this truce, listening in the dark yard. I had hoped softness would fix it. Instead, I had only wasted precious time. My misjudgment was clear. Pulling back would not make the threat disappear. I was more alone than ever. My best friend was not fully in my corner, and the man I married counting down toward leaving me. The following days felt surreal. The tension of months of waiting and watching had snapped, replaced by a heavy, quiet sadness. Dan stayed in the house for 3 more days, sleeping on the couch. We moved around each other like strangers sharing the same roof. There were no more glowing silver numbers floating above his head. That strange supernatural gift or curse had vanished along with the countdown. I would never see those ticking digits hanging over another person again. Dan stopped trying to bargain. He understood I would not change my mind about the marriage. He contacted his own attorney, and the formal divorce process got underway. The papers did land on our kitchen quartz island eventually, just like they had for my mother. But this time everything was different. I was not a 12-year-old child standing by, helpless and shocked. I was an adult, with copies of evidence, legal counsel, and a clear plan for my next chapter. I packed a suitcase and moved into Rachel's spare bedroom temporarily. Her apartment felt small and safe, a shelter away from all the memories inside our old house. Rachel and I slowly mended our friendship. We talked honestly about her mistake of calling Dan behind my back. She admitted she had underestimated how deep the rot ran inside our marriage. Trust never returned to exactly the way it had been before, but we found a new, more honest version of our bond. The divorce dragged on for months. Dan fought over property division at first. He tried to argue that my evidence meant little, and attempted to revive the old narrative that I was driven by childhood trauma. But my documented receipts, security footage, and text message photos held weight. The attorney guided me through every round of negotiation. In the end, we reached a fair settlement. I kept a portion of our joint savings, walked away with my retirement funds intact, and we agreed to sell the suburban house we had bought. I drove past that downtown apartment complex month. I saw Dan's sedan parked out front. He had gotten the new life he had worked so hard, but it had come at the cost of 7 years of marriage and any goodwill. I did not stop. I had no desire to live. Slowly, I rebuilt my own world. I rented a small, bright apartment not far from my work. I hung new art walls, bought furniture I picked out only for. Some nights I still woke up from old nightmares of my father walking out the kitchen door, but those nightmares grew less frequent with time. I no longer feared being abandoned. I had learned I did not need to rely on someone else's choice to define. I thought often about the countdown gift that had haunted me. It had shown me pain ahead of time. It had forced me to carry a terrible secret I could never share with anyone. But it had also given me warning. It gave time to prepare, instead of being crushed by sudden ruin. The vision gone forever, yet the lesson stayed with me. People do not break you in a single moment. The decision to leave always comes quietly, long before the. One mild autumn evening, I sat in my new kitchen, sipping. Outside the window, crickets chirped twilight. The same sound I had heard so many nights back. There was no faint silver glow over anyone. No clock ticking down toward loss. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I had broken the cycle that had shaped so much of my youth. I did not get saved by a perfect husband. I had saved myself.